Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Mike Bartner Show. I am happy to be here on the first day of hockey back. We finally have hockey to play. Hockey is being played tonight. We obviously have the triple header on, I believe, ESPN tonight. I'm so excited to dive into those games. But we have a couple big news coming out of the NHL the past 2 days, as well as me giving my Stanley Cup predictions and just overall running down my overall predictions for this season. So without further ado, let's dive into it. And we're going to lead off with the Jets locking up their team legends. I wouldn't say they're like NHL legends by any means, but after months of speculation and most casuals thinking they were going to leave, Hellebuck and Scheifele are here for the long haul. Do you think this is a good move for the team? That comes to us from Alyssa. So obviously, out of nowhere, shocking the hockey world. The other extension we're going to talk about didn't really shock like this one. Connor Hellebuck and Mark Scheifele have both signed 7-year, $8.5 million contracts to stay with the Winnipeg Jets. They were heavily speculated as potential trade deadline pieces if the Winnipeg Jets got off to a slow start. I personally thought they were going to get traded this summer just because, given the weird state that Winnipeg is in right now, I thought they were going to commit to more of a retool, but that's not the case. Obviously, they think that they could potentially win this year and with this core over the next 2 to 3 years. And although I don't really think that they're going to end up winning anything in terms of the playoffs, actually go on a deep run, I understand why you would do this, why you would give these two players that have given so much to your franchise, just decide to lock them up, keep the core together. Because at the end of the day, Winnipeg is not like other markets. It's not a market where you can do a 4 to 5 year rebuild like, say, the Montreal Canadiens. You need to keep them relevant. You need to keep attendance up, considering the Winnipeg is one of the smallest, probably is without a doubt, actually, the smallest market in the entire NHL. So when looking at Hellebuck and Scheifele, yes, these contracts might age horribly. Yes, they are probably going to age horribly, which I'll get into in a bit. This team will be a competitive team for the next 2 to 3 years. And if they did have to go through this rebuild, for all we know, they could have been the Houston Jets in 3 years from now, announced to leave. Now, when looking at directly at the contracts, the Mark Scheifele one really stands out. I think this one is going to age pretty brutally because right now, even though he did just score 42 goals, I'm not 100% sure he's even worth $8.5 million heading into next year at age 31, or he's 30 this year, kicks in when he's 31 years old. His defensive numbers are obviously pretty bad. He's a pretty good play driver. He's an elite finisher. He's been around above 15% shooting for the past couple years. But when looking at Mark Scheifele, he hasn't shown any signs of regression, obviously, but regression is coming. Do I think this is going to be as bad as the Huberdeau deal? No, because it is $2 million less, but it is a similar aging curve. Huberdeau's kicks in when he's 30 or 31 years old. So when looking at Scheifele, this is going to be a bad deal, but for Mark Scheifele, he has been so underpaid in prior years, and that's not a reason to give a guy a big deal, but he was making, $6 million for the last 6 years, and they got a legit near point per game center out of him. So it's kind of... was he their first? I think he was their first draft pick of all time, too. So it's kind of just paying him for what he did in the past and going forward. And going forward over the next 3 years, Mark Scheifele still should be a pretty good number one center. I don't think he's a top 10 center in the league, but next year I'd peg him at around... I'd peg him at around 35 goals, 35 assists, 70 points. The defense is obviously not ideal, but he has the track record of a legit number one center. Worry about that later, but right now you're not going to find a Mark Scheifele replacement. And in terms of if you traded him for what? He makes $6 million next year. No one could really give up that much because there's not a lot of cap space going around. So if you traded Mark Scheifele, you probably would have gotten like a first round pick and a B to B plus prospect. I don't think the Mark Scheifele market was that massive. So is a late first round pick and a B plus prospect going to end up being a better player than Mark Scheifele over the next 5 years? Like Mark Scheifele's next 5 years, I'm not sure you're ever going to get that value out of those future assets. So if you're Winnipeg, you take the sure thing, you just lock him the hell up and basically have him retire as a Jet. Now, in terms of Connor Hellebuck, I am a lot more optimistic of Connor Hellebuck because this guy's just been an absolute stud since he walked into the NHL. Obviously, has a Vezina trophy. His worst year was when he put up a 910, and even that year, his advanced stats were still like 20 goals saved above expected. He is the definition of consistency. Never been above 3 goals against, and mind you, again, the regular stats don't do him justice in this scenario. His advanced stats are absolutely insane, and he's been an utter workhorse for this team. Could that maybe lend towards him regressing sooner? It's definitely possible, but I think over the first 2 to 3 years of this deal, it's probably going to be positive value. A guy like Connor Hellebuck, a surefire top 5 goalie in the NHL. Again, similar to Scheifele, that's even harder to replace. Getting a legit starting goalie is, once you have that, it's really hard to say, yeah, we're going to pass, we're going to get rid of you. And similarly to a Mark Scheifele, I don't think the market, I saw MBI Hockey talking about this, I don't think the market for Connor Hellebuck was that massive, considering teams are seeing guys like Adin Hill go on these miracle runs. I don't think the need for a big top number 1 goalie is as massive as it was in previous years. So when looking at Connor Hellebuck, similar to Mark Scheifele, you weren't going to get that sick of a package for him. If Connor Hellebuck was 26, 27 years old, similar to like a UC Saros, the Predators decided to trade him, I think you'd get a bag. But considering Connor Hellebuck's age and the fact that was going to be due this massive extension, no team was willing to give up an absolute king's ransom for them. So I think it is a pretty solid deal. Yes, it will be brutal the final 2 to 3 years of that contract, but the Winnipeg Jets had to do this. And now with the Winnipeg Jets, I said this on Twitter, but and my guy Brady said this as well. Brady, NHL Chunky, said, to me, the 55 and 37 contracts signal that the Jets believe they are closer to the team that was first in the West in December rather than the team that tripped and fell into the playoffs. The goal is to win in the next couple of years. The team better be the team is better with them than without them. And yeah, I think while they're definitely not on the level like the Edmonton Oilers and the Colorado Avalanche, this team, if they decide to keep on not going all in, but decide to trade some assets at the deadline, trade some other prospects to get better right now, this is a playoff team. This is definitely a playoff team. Could they finish third in the Central? I think it's definitely possible. Them and the Minnesota Wild now are honestly a toss-up in my opinion. And if you are going to lock up Hellebuck and Scheifele, you kind of do need to double down on this win now kind of mentality. It doesn't make sense if they decide, oh, we're all set. We just have this mid team. You got to double down. Similarly to my New York Islanders. My New York Islanders obviously went out and got Bo Horvat. Once you make a move like that, you need to be win now, win now, win now. Will it end up working out? No, probably not. But at least they have a direction. I said on my Instagram story, the worst thing that an NHL team can be is directionalist. If they headed into this season with them both being pending UFAs, that was really the doomsday juggernaut apocalypse situation when you consider there was a real possibility that they could have left for literally nothing. At least now you know you're going to have this solid team for the next 2 to 3 years. Is it going to result in actual playoff success? I'm a lot more pessimistic on others, but I do think that Kevin Cheveldayoff, and another factor of this regarding Kevin Cheveldayoff is it's very easy for fans at home to play armchair general manager and say, I would have entered a rebuild. I would have done a 3 to 4 year rebuild. But when you're in the shoes of Kevin Cheveldayoff and you don't know that you're going to survive a rebuild, it is way easier said than done to say, yeah, we're going to suck for the next 3 to 4 years. And again, there's no guarantee that a rebuild works. You look at a team, although it appears like these two teams are coming out of a rebuild successfully now. Buffalo and Arizona have been rebuilding for like the better part of a decade almost. Arizona had like a couple good years with Taylor Hall. I think they made the playoffs or they made the qualifying round and ended up making the playoffs. But that's an example. Yes, the New Jersey Devils, sometimes a rebuild goes well. Yes, the Colorado Avalanche stink in 2017, get Cale Makar, they're on their merry way. But when looking at a rebuild, although I think it is the best way to build a contender, there is no guarantee that a rebuild will end up working. And for a market like Winnipeg that's already, even with the playoff team last year, in terms of raw attendance numbers, not percentage, I think even percentage, they were down in the bottom 10%. They're a bottom 5 attendance team in total with the playoff team, with the goddamn playoff team. This isn't the Montreal Canadiens that can still sell out the Bell Center somehow, even when they do suck. That's not the case in Winnipeg. And there's so many financial factors, not just on the ice factors with this, that I do like the idea of them just locking up Hellebuck and Scheifele and saying, yeah, we're going to be competitive for the next 2 to 3 years. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about that move? Do you think it's going to backfire horribly? Again, I think in 5 to 6 years, the Jets will be in a bad spot with those contracts. Hopefully the cap continues to rise and absolutely skyrocket where they can dump them or it's not that big of a deal. But I think right now, given the circumstances around the Winnipeg Jets, it's something you had to do. It's kind of like a necessary evil. Moving on. Rasmus Dahlin secures a bag. Rasmus Dahlin just signed a mega 8x11 the day before the season. This seems steep compared to Fox, McAvoy, and Makar's deal. He could grow into it, but there's some risk. That comes to us from Brian. And yeah, another out of nowhere extension. It happened at like 8 a.m. Rasmus Dahlin obviously got a super mega bag, 8 years, $11 million. By far passing Adam Fox, who signed a 6 by 9.5, Kel McCarr, 5 or 6 years, $9 million, McAvoy, 8 years, 9.5. Rasmus Dahlin becomes the highest paid defenseman since Erik Karlsson signed his extension back in 2019 and signed the exact same extension as Drew Doughty back in 2019, making him the tied for second highest annual average value contract ever. It's tied for fourth in terms of pure value overall millions. Only Ryan Suter and Shea Weber, because of their 13 and 14-year deals, have higher, larger deals. But when you look at Rasmus Dahlin, I do think it is. I think he's worth it. I really like the deal when it was 10.5. 11 just seems fair. I don't know how you can justify it as like an utter steal unless you think he's going to become like 1A, 1B with McCarr. That's what he'd have to turn into for this to become a good deal. But it is pretty fair value. You look at Cale McCarr, you look at Rasmus Dahlin last year. By far his best year, both offensively and defensively. He really took that another step, was fantastic on the power play for the Buffalo Sabres, 73 points. If he can continue to put that up, I think that is worth it. That is near point per game, solid defensively, legit top 5 defenseman in the entire league last year. Going forward, that's definitely going to be worth $11 million. And in terms of the contract projections, The Athletic does seem to think that this is a pretty fair deal. They're a little bit lower on his defense. I think his defense is okay. I wouldn't say it's negative, but it's about average, maybe slightly above average, but it's obviously that offense that you're paying for. And in terms of The Athletic, they're projecting by like year 3, 4 that this becomes a surplus deal for them. A little bit of an overpayment at the start, but a surplus deal in terms of that, the cap eventually rising even more. And yeah, you look at McCarr, Fox, McAvoy, yes, they did get less, but yes, they did sign in a flat cap system. They signed, I believe, in 2021 or 2022 when there were still 2 to 3 years left in terms of flat cap. So I don't really like that comparison. And honestly, Rasmus Dahlin is 2 to 3 years younger, 2 years younger than those guys, and 1 year younger than McCarr. So when looking at Rasmus Dahlin, I don't really like that comparison. Those deals are more utter steals than per se Rasmus Dahlin being an overpayment. Yes, there is some risk considering Rasmus Dahlin. This was his first very, very elite year. He had a very good rookie year, 44 points. Sophomore year, 40 points in 59 games. It looked like he was breaking out then. Then he regressed a lot, 23 points in 56 games with a minus 36. The previous year, 53 points in 80 games. Looked like a solid number one. And then this year, he obviously explodes. So there's definitely some risk that I don't think he's going to go back to like him 2 years ago, 23 points in 56 games. But maybe there is some risk that this was the best version of Rasmus Dahlin that we're going to see. Maybe going forward, he's 65 to 70 points, which will still be a top 10 defenseman in the entire league. So there is some risk that he doesn't have a track record compared to a McCarr who won the Norris, was a Norris runner-up, then won the Norris, then got paid, or an Adam Fox who won the Norris and then got paid right after. He doesn't really have quite the most impressive track record, so I can see where people are coming from that it's not a slam dunk. It's not a slam dunk like, say, a Tage Thompson, like a Dylan Cousins, how they aged into their deals and they're fantastic. But I think it is about fair market value. Going forward for a top 5 defenseman, it's going to be around $11 million. For a top 5, even top 10 forward, it's going to be $12 to $13 million. Austin Matthews obviously just reset that market. So those numbers, they make about sense. And as the salary cap continues to rise, and also just when you are the Buffalo Sabres and you have such an advantageous salary cap situation for the most part, besides that Jeff Skinner deal has 4 years left, but Jeff Skinner was worth roughly $9 million last year. He was very impressive. But when you have Dylan Cousins and Tage Thompson making $4.24 million for the next 7 years, you don't need to get utter slam dunks on every single deal going forward. And even Matthias Samuelsson, I don't think that he's this utter stud, but he's a very solid top 4 defensive defenseman. He's locked up long-term. Connor Clifton's whatever. But they have such a good salary cap structure because of those 2 centers. And I assume with their other restricted free agents, they're going to get other solid deals, that I don't think it's essential that they bargained extremely hard with Rasmus Dahlin and pinched pennies and did a short-term deal. Just lock him up. So then in those 4 to 5 years, once the salary cap starts to rise, maybe the first couple of years won't be home runs like the Tage Thompson and Dylan Cousins deals, but by year 4, by year 5, $11 million really won't be that much compared to if they bridged him at 3 years, $10 million, and then the next contract also had to go up to like $12 million. Just lock him up, get it done. But the one thing with the Buffalo Sabres that's going to be interesting now is Owen Power is a restricted free agent after this season. Do you lock him up right away? I think you definitely can, given the cap situation. I would give him a similar deal to Jake Sanderson now, which might sound steep because he's never going to be the number one guy in Buffalo. I think we can all agree in that. But if you lock him up on an 8x8, even an 8.85, if you believe that Owen Power is going to become a top 30 defenseman in the entire NHL, that's worth it. That's definitely worth it, especially given his age, given the fact that it's not like Erasmus Dahlin where they bridged him initially, and now they're paying him between the ages of, I believe, 24 or 25 up until his early 30s. If you can get Owen Power locked up from 21 or 22 to 30, his entire prime, like Rasmus Dahlin, he's not going to be falling off a cliff at 31 and 32, but he's not going to be absolutely in his prime. There's going to be some regression on that back end. Owen Power, you can just lock him the hell up and just let that deal age throughout his entire prime. If I'm the Buffalo Sabres, if I'm Kevin Adams, I saw how well Tage Thompson worked out. I saw how well Dylan Cousins worked out. Owen Power obviously had a very good rookie year, 35 points, Calder finalist. I think it's safe to assume that he's going to become a legit number 2, and on most teams, he'd probably end up being a number 1. If you're Owen Power, you're probably going to wait and see how the season goes, just because if he does break out even more, maybe he can get 9.5 this summer. But if I'm Kevin Adams, I'm trying to get that deal done as soon as possible. I am not messing around with that. But if you end up messing around with that in, let's say a hypothetical, let's say Rasmus Dahlin gets hurt, nothing too serious, but he misses like a month or two or just a decent amount of the season, but he's healthy for the playoffs or if they make the playoffs down the stretch. Say that happens and Owen Power steps up into a number 1 role and just absolutely goes off. And then you have to pay him $9.5 to $10 million. And then you have 2 near $10 million defensemen combined make $20 to $21 million. That's going to be a problem. That's when it starts getting a problem. So I personally would lock up Owen Power as soon as possible. Will Kevin Adams do that? We'll see. I don't think it's as essential as obviously locking up Rasmus Dahlin before this season, but it's definitely going to be interesting, something to monitor, that Owen Power is that restricted free agent. And if they can get that core of Dahlin, Power, Thompson, Cousins, right now it's $25.2 million combined. They can get those 3 locked up below $33 million roughly. That's going to be very good work. That's your 4 core pieces only taking up what'll be a third of the salary cap in like 2 to 3 years. That's fantastic work. But moving on, the next topic, the final topic before we go into my predictions, we got something on Elias Pettersson that kind of came out of nowhere. The Canucks don't want EP. So it was recently speculated that Pettersson may not be willing to re-sign, but now Freeman just said that the Canucks might not be willing to commit to him. How are they so incompetent? That comes to us from Reese. So yeah, there was this weird tweet from 32 Thoughts, or just weird quote from Freeman, or from his podcast, 32 Thoughts, that the Canucks have also indicated that they're not sure. If there's any doubt Pettersson is not sure he wants to make a commitment, I'm not sure the Canucks want to make a commitment either. What that? Like that makes no sense. I'm sorry, that makes absolutely no sense. So apparently the Canucks might not be willing to commit long-term to Elias Pettersson, like their franchise center, by far most talented player, like since the Sedins. That is, I hope that Freeman's just talking out of his ass, because if that is the case, I feel horrible for Canucks fans. And by that, I don't think that like the Canucks are like, we don't want to resign him, period. I think they're saying that we don't want to give him a $11 million a year deal quite yet, because he hasn't really stacked multiple elite seasons. But when looking at the Canucks, it should be their number 1 priority right now to re-sign Elias Pettersson. I don't think I'm shocking anybody with that take. That he is the franchise. Quinn Hughes is definitely the captain, but Elias Pettersson is your best player. He is going to be the guy that if you end up going on a deep run, he's going to be your Conn Smythe winner. He's going to be your face of the franchise. When looking at Elias Pettersson, the only reason that I think this could make sense is if the Canucks think maybe we don't make the playoffs this year, is it time to just blow it up? I guess that could make sense, just because given the nature of they've been so unsuccessful the past 5 years, Would they hit that reset button? The problem that I have with that is if you're going to trade Elias Pettersson, you got to trade Quinn Hughes as well. What's the point of keeping one when they're 1 year apart? It's not like Quinn Hughes is 20 years old and Elias Pettersson is 26. They're 24 and 23. They go hand in hand. So if you're not willing to commit to Elias Pettersson and give him a long-term deal, what are we doing? What are we doing with Quinn Hughes? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you trade Elias Pettersson, you got to enter like a nuclear rebuild, which they just have not seemed to be willing to do. Based on all indications, they traded away Bo Horvat. We thought, hey, they're finally getting some assets. They're finally thinking about this long term. Then they go out and trade for Filip Hronek, which I think was a solid deal. I think Filip Hronek's going to be a good second pair defenseman for them, but it didn't make a lot of sense. It did not make a lot of sense to basically kick your captain out and then trade even more assets for another guy. Just really weird. Just really weird. And you look at the Canucks salary cap structure, they don't have any money like committed long term. That's the other thing. It's not like they have this packed salary cap sheet. They have Quinn Hughes signed 4 more years at 7.8. They have JT Miller signed 8 years at $8 million. But besides that, their longest contract is Connor Garland, 3 years, 4.95. So yeah, I don't really get the hesitation here unless they're willing to blow it up, which I think it'll be very interesting. I personally think the Canucks are going to be a pretty solid team this year. I have them at 94 points. But if they miss the playoffs, you do have to definitely look at potentially blowing it up. If they're healthy and they miss the playoffs, last year's disaster with Boudreau, midseason gets fired. They have a bunch of front office shakeups. I understand last year was a mistake. Not a mistake, but just another failure and just a disaster. But if they don't make the playoffs this year, I think you may potentially have to look into trading Pettersson. And Pettersson would get you an absolute haul. If you traded Pettersson and Hughes, that would net you like 4 first-round picks and like 2 to 3 very good prospects. Not saying it's going to happen, but it's definitely something to monitor. And considering this quote from Elliot Friedman, something that could potentially happen down the road, but definitely not right now. I think they should lock him up. I think they're absolutely clowns for that. But let me know in the comments. What do you think? And moving on, now we are going to just run through my season predictions. I've been dropping them over the past week or so. We're going to go quickly division by division. Then I'm going to do my major awards. Then I'm going to tell you which teams I think are going to make the Western and Eastern Conference Finals, which team I think is going to make the finals, and just who's going to win the Stanley Cup as a whole. But let's get into it. First up, the Atlantic Division. I dropped this earlier today. I have the Toronto Maple Leafs in first place with 109 points. The Ottawa Senators in second with 102. The Tampa Bay Lightning with 97. Boston Bruins with 95. Panthers with 92. Sabres with 88. Wings with 81. And Habs with 69. Moving on, we got the Metro Division. 113 for the Canes. 106 for the Devils. Rangers, 100. Penguins, 96. Islanders, 92. Capitals, 89. Jackets, 75. Flyers, 64. Quick little breakdown of that. I'm pretty high on the Devils, but I think that it's going to take some time for them to kind of develop some of their young guys to develop into the new role. The Canucks are an absolute the Canes are an absolute regular season wagon. I don't think that that's that controversial, but overall, I think the Penguins somehow sneak in, and the Rangers are still a playoff team. The Central Division, I have the Stars at 110, the Avalanche at 106, Wild at 99, Jets 94, Blues 89, Preds 84, Yotes 81, the Hawks 57. I don't think that this one's that controversial. Hawks stink. Preds, Yotes, not there quite yet. Blues, mid. Jets, I might actually bump them up a couple spots now that I know that they're not going to be blowing it up. Then the top 3 is pretty consensus. And then finally, we got the Pacific Division. Oilers 111, Kings 104, Knights 102, Flames 98, Canucks 93, Kraken 88, Ducks 70, Sharks 56. Sharks are going to be god-awful. I can't wait to see how that goes. But yeah, that's my division standing predictions. Now let's get into the awards. Hart and Art Ross. I don't think I'm shocking anybody here. I got Connor McDavid winning the Hart and the Art Ross. I have him winning the Art Ross at 137 points. I think he probably leads the league by 17 to 20 points. Draisaitl will probably have 117 or something like that. For the Norris, Cale Makar. Well, actually, let's go back to Connor McDavid. If I was not going to pick Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews would be my Hart pick. Norris, Cale Makar, Pretty safe pick, 66 points in 60 games last year, won the Norris the prior year. As long as he plays 75 games, he's pretty easily my pick. For my second place, I'm actually going to go with Quinn Hughes. Calder, Connor Bedard, I think he's going to be in the high 70s, score mid-30s goals. Chicago stinks, but he's going to get so many opportunities on their top line, top power play, playing 19, maybe sniff it even 20 minutes a night. And Taylor Hall isn't absolutely washed up, so I think they're going to be a solid line. And in terms of second place, dark horse, because this is a pretty obvious pick, I got Adam Fantilli. Vezina, Igor Shesterkin, this guy's going to have to stand on his head. Jonathan Quick is absolutely washed up, so Igor Shesterkin's going to have to play 60, 65 games. He won the Vezina when he only played 52 games. So I think with that added workload, it's going to increase his chances. And he might be up for the Hart, considering how much the Rangers... I don't really fully believe in the Rangers this year. Igor Shesterkin's going to have to carry. In terms of the Selke, Nico Hischier, I just feel like the narrative's coming together for him. Patrice Bergeron retires last year. He's kind of, by the media, been deemed the next Patrice Bergeron, which I think is obviously stupid. But I think he slides in and gets his first Selke. The Rocket, Austin Matthews, I think he's sniffing 60, maybe even hits it this year. Had a big down year last year, has a lot of people to prove wrong. Jack Adams, I'm going to go with Jay Woodcroft. I had the Edmonton Oilers at 111 points. He's had the second best record in the entire NHL since taking over for the Edmonton Oilers. He just consistently puts the team in a good position to win, especially in the regular season. Playoffs, we'll see how it goes. And then in terms of the Jim Gregory, I have Tom Fitzgerald. Tom Fitzgerald obviously went out and fleeced the Calgary Flames for Tyler Toffoli this summer. Jaeger Sharangovich in a third was absolutely crazy. His other moves have been very effective for this team. He locked up Bratt and Meyer this summer. And just looking at it, the Jim Gregory is an award that goes to a team that makes the conference finals, and I do think the Devils will make the conference finals. It's so stupid how it gets voted on after the second round of the playoffs. But now we are going to do my cup picks. I'm going to give you who I think is going to be playing in the Stanley Cup final and who's going to win. And up first, the team that I think is going to be the runner-up is the New Jersey Devils. I look at the Devils this year. Their top six is absolutely gross. I don't have them that high in the standings because I think guys like Luke Hughes, Simone Nemec, even Tyler Toffoli adjusting to that team, adjusting to that system, and that goaltending tandem is okay, but I don't think it's anything special. I think they're going to somewhat struggle in the regular season a little bit out of the gate, but once this team gets the chemistry going on, and I think Schmidt or Vanacek, one of them will emerge as a legit guy that can potentially go on a run. We saw with Adin Hill, the Devils just need to put out a good team in front of him, and Akira Schmidt can absolutely ball, or Vanacek. So I think once the playoffs come around, this team will be cooking. They have the firepower to keep up with anybody, and I think they will have the D-core this time around to potentially beat the Carolina Hurricanes. Last year, Carolina obviously disposed of that. I kind of expected that just because it was the Devils' first run. I think this time around, they're going to have far more experience, know how to deal with a team like Carolina that's a lot more physical of a team. I think they've added some physicality. So when looking at the New Jersey Devils, I think this is a year where they potentially go on a run and take that next step. Last year was the regular season success. This year, they're going to go further in the playoffs and get it done. And winning the Stanley Cup, I probably should make a whole goddamn video on this, but my Stanley Cup pick for next year, it's not the Edmonton Oilers. It's not the Edmonton Oilers. I am not believing in the Edmonton Oilers again. I hook, line, and sinker fell for them last year, and I do think they are going to make the Western Conference Finals, but my pick is coming out of the Central Division. My Stanley Cup pick. It's a team that I think is kind of being underrated. As crazy as it is to sound, I don't have them winning the Central Division because they do have a lot of new pieces that I think are going to take some time to develop chemistry and just overall into the system. But I got the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup. It came to me in this past week. I wasn't that high on Colorado if you told me 2 months ago, 3 months ago, but I've slowly started to like this team. A really underrated ad was Thomas Tatar, in my opinion. He kind of chokes in the playoffs, but I think at some point he has to actually have a good playoff run. But when you look at this team, last year they were kind of cooked, especially against Seattle once Valery Nichushkin went down once he had his whole situation. But when looking at this team, they really addressed their depth issues this year. They go out, they get Johansson. Ross Colton, I think, is going to be an upgrade over now Alex Newhook. Miles Wood, not that good of a player. Okay, bottom sixer. Who else did they bring in? Jonathan Drouin, I think, can be a good pickup because he obviously has played with Nathan MacKinnon in past years. And just overall, I think they will have a cleaner bill of health. Bowen Byram has not been able to stay healthy. Cale Makar got suspended in one of those games against Seattle, but yeah, he hasn't been healthy. So I think if this team is healthy, they're maybe not as good as their 2022 counterpart, because that was, in my opinion, one of the greatest just period teams we've ever seen. I think they might be the most talented team of all time. 119 points in the regular season and then go 16-4 in the playoffs. It was absolutely insane. So I look at the Colorado Avalanche this year, and I think they actually have, obviously, their big three, their three superstars. And instead of Landeskog, who is a very good player and is worth $7 million, they were able to spread out some of that money in order to get Ryan Johansson, get a Jonathan Drouin, get a Ross Colton, get a Thomas Tatar at $1.5 million. They are actually 3 lines deep compared to last year, especially once Nichushkin went down. They were absolutely cooked. They still went to 7 games. They still easily could have won that, even with the Makar suspension. I think this year they're going to kind of remind us why this time a year ago we were thinking that they were the next potential dynasty. Alexander Georgiev's going to be massive for them. He was very good in the regular season. He played fine in the playoffs. It was more of just the team overall kind of let them down. But I think that he is the kind of goalie that can be relied on to potentially go on a run. He is a little bit inconsistent, but if we see Adin Hill go out and ball out, Georgiev can have a similar run. And even when they won the Stanley Cup, Darcy Kemper was not that good. For me, the X factor is obviously a guy like Bowen Byram. Can he take that next step is going to be very interesting. Their defense core is good. Their forward core actually has some depth, and the goaltending is not a massive concern. So I look at the Colorado Avalanche. They're still like first or second in cup odds, but I see no one picking them. I think they're going to remind people why they were deemed this next dynasty and get their second cup in 3 years. Now that I say this, Edmonton's definitely going to win the Stanley Cup. Like, book it, put the house on it. Now then, Colorado's going to lose in the first round. But I think they have that, especially that playoff hunger that they lost in the first round. They feel embarrassed. Everybody's talking about Edmonton losing in the second round. Colorado is probably 10 times more pissed. Everybody is sleeping on them. Nathan MacKinnon, guy, is an absolute warrior. And you look at them from a front office perspective. Last year, they kind of admitted, especially once Landeskog was done, they admitted that we're not going to go all in. Their deadline moves like Lars Eller. So now they have 2 elite prospects in Richie and Guliev, and they have their first round pick this year and next year. I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive at the deadline and potentially add most likely to that forward core and get, if Johansson isn't pulling his weight, get a legit second line center or maybe a legit first line winger. If Jonathan Drouin is not as great as we expect him to be with Nathan MacKinnon, not as good. But I think they're going to, last year was kind of an off year for them, but they are going to be fully back and fully aggressive this year to go all in and win that Stanley Cup. But let me know in the comments, what do you think? I got the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup, beating the New Jersey Devils. I want to hear from you guys, though. That's the end of the show, 32 minutes. I might be streaming some of these games tonight, might be streaming Penguins versus Blackhawks. I'll let you guys know later. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next.